My name is Alara Vance, and the first thing I remember is the blood. It wasn't the memory of a scraped knee or a pricked finger from childhood. It was the visceral, life-ending flood of it, soaking through my clothes, pooling on the cold, grimy concrete of a basement floor I was never meant to die in. I remember the weight of the chains on my wrists, the hollow ache of starvation in my belly, and the searing, tearing agony as the tiny, fragile life inside me was beaten out of existence. The last sound I heard was the echo of his voice, laced with a hatred I still cannot fathom. You love seducing men, don't you, Alara? Then you can sleep to your heart's content here. Then silence. And then, light. I woke up gasping, my hands flying to my flat, unmarred stomach. Silk sheets, not rough concrete. The scent of jasmine from my garden, not the stench of mildew and despair. Sunlight streamed through the bay windows of my bedroom, a room I hadn't seen in years. A quick, frantic check of my phone and the date on the polished silver clock on my nightstand confirmed the impossible. I was back. 2 years in the past. The day of the Sterling family's annual gala. The day my life had effectively ended the first time. For a long time I just sat on the edge of my bed, trembling. The memories of my previous life weren't like a bad dream. They were a scar etched into my soul. I remembered the forced marriage to Julian Blackwood after the unfortunate incident at this very gala. I remembered how he used my family's name, our resources, our connections, to climb the corporate and social ladder, all while his heart remained steadfastly with his first love, Isabella Rossi. I remembered the coldness in his eyes that grew with each passing month, the way he sent Isabella overseas, supposedly to protect her from the drama I caused. And I remembered with chilling clarity the day his men came for me. The basement. The torture. The pregnancy. The miscarriage. The blood. A cold, hard knot of resolve formed in my chest, burning away the last of my fear. I would not be that Alara again. I would not be the pawn, the victim, the fool. Heaven, fate, or some cosmic error had given me a weapon far greater than any physical strength. Foreknowledge. And I intended to use it. That evening, as I stood at the periphery of the Sterling ballroom, the scene was a perfect, glittering replica of my memories. The women in their diamonds, the men in their tailored tuxedos, the air thick with the scent of expensive perfume and whispered gossip. And there he was. Julian Blackwood, my fiancé. He was as handsome as ever, with his dark hair and charming smile, but now I could see the calculating glint in his eyes that I had once mistaken for ambition. I saw him accept a glass of champagne from a server, the same server I remembered Isabella Rossi whispering to moments before. The script was unfolding. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching a play I had already memorized. I waited, my heart a steady, cold drum in my chest. I didn't have to wait long. I saw the faint sheen of sweat appear on Julian's brow, saw him loosen his collar, his movements becoming slightly uncoordinated. The drug was taking effect. In my first life, this was the moment my heart had leapt into my throat with panic. I had rushed to his side, produced the small vial of antidote I always carried just in case, and helped him to a private room to recover. That was when the door had burst open, revealing a crowd led by Mrs. Sterling herself. We were found in a compromising, though entirely innocent, position. The scandal was too great. Our wedding was moved up and my doom was sealed. This time I did not move. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my champagne and turned, melting back into the crowd. I found a secluded alcove with a good view of the main hall and waited. The murmur started as a ripple, then grew into a wave of shocked gasps and hurried whispers. I saw Julian, his face now flushed a deep red, stumbling through the throng of people. He wasn't looking for me. He was moving with a single-minded, drugged desperation. He crashed into Isabella Rossi, his arms locking around her like a drowning man clutching a life raft. "Izzy," I heard him slur, his voice thick. "It's so hot, don't let go." Isabella, for her part, feigned surprise for a moment before her arms wrapped around him, a possessive, triumphant glint in her eyes. She began to guide him not away from the crowd, but toward the grand staircase leading to the private guest suites. The trap was being sprung, but I was no longer the bait. It was time for my performance. I let the calm mask slip from my face, allowing the tremor I felt in my hands to travel up my arms. I made my way through the crowd, not toward the scandal but toward my parents. My mother, Eleanor Vance, was deep in conversation with a business associate, her elegant laughter ringing out. I stumbled into her line of sight, my eyes wide, my breathing deliberately shallow. "Mom," I whispered, my voice choked. "I don't feel well. I want to go home. Right now." The smile vanished from her face, replaced by immediate concern. "Alara, what's wrong? You're pale as a ghost. Where's Julian? Why did he leave you alone?" I shook my head, letting a single, perfect tear trace a path down my cheek. "Don't ask. Please just take me home. I don't want to see him again." The grief and resentment in my voice were not entirely feigned. They were the echoes of a woman who had already lived through the consequences of his betrayal. My pitiful state was a magnet for attention. The people around us stopped their conversations, their eyes alight with curiosity. "Are the young couple fighting?" someone murmured. "This is the Sterling matriarch's birthday banquet. Don't make a scene, dear." "That's right, Alara," said a woman who had always been jealous of my family's standing. "Julian doesn't treat you that badly. Don't overreact." I looked at her, my voice dropping to a cold, carrying whisper. "So, him sleeping with another woman is also my fault?" The gasps that erupted were like music. My mother's face turned from concern to fury in an instant. "Alara, what did you just say? Julian dared to betray you? Where is he?" I didn't answer. I just stared toward the second floor, my silence more damning than any accusation. My mother, a lioness when her cub was threatened, grabbed my hand. "We are going to find out what is going on right now." "Mom, stop," I pleaded, pulling back slightly. "Let's just go home." "No," she said, her voice steely. "It was his family who begged us for this engagement. Now it hasn't even been long and he's with another woman? Where does that leave the Vance family's dignity?" Before I could protest further, she was dragging me toward the stairs. The commotion had attracted the attention of the hostess herself, Mrs. Agatha Sterling. Hearing that someone had dared to commit such a disgraceful act at her birthday banquet, she was livid. Her face was a thundercloud as she led a group of her stern-faced bodyguards toward us. "Please, Mrs. Sterling, don't," I said, my voice trembling. "Let the Blackwoods apologize later, but don't go upstairs." Outwardly, I was the picture of a forgiving, humiliated fiancé. Inside, I was secretly thrilled. If Mrs. Sterling found out that the woman tangled up with Julian was her own precious niece, Isabella, I wondered just how furious she would be. My mother tightened her grip on my arm. "Alara Vance, what did I teach you? Why are you being soft now? He's just Julian Blackwood. There are plenty of trash men like him in this world. Our family doesn't need him." Mrs. Sterling gave a cold, approving nod. "Mrs. Vance is absolutely right. Miss Vance, you've made quite a poor choice in men." I could only remain silent, thinking, I hope she can still keep that high and mighty tone in a moment. The procession up the stairs felt like a march to an execution, but I was no longer the one on the chopping block. The moment we reached the second-floor hallway, the lewd, unmistakable sounds of passion filled the air. Faces all around us flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and prurient interest. "How shameless. Which cheap woman is it this time?" someone muttered. "Young and vigorous, huh? Julian really has stamina," another snickered. Mrs. Sterling's face turned the color of slate. "Break the door down," she commanded, her voice shaking with rage. At her command, the guards kicked the solid oak door twice, and it flew open with a splintering crash. The scene inside was exactly as I knew it would be, yet seeing it again through new eyes was still a shock. Clothes were scattered across the floor. The woman, her back to the door, was moving wildly. Julian was beneath her, his eyes glazed and unfocused. Mrs. Sterling furiously pointed a trembling finger. "Drag her down right now. Let me see which shameless hussy this is." A guard stepped forward, grabbed the woman by her hair and yanked her off the man. Yet she screamed, a whiny, drugged sound, and clung desperately to Julian, refusing to let go. "No. I still want more. You guys can join in too." Her voice, that particular seductive tone, made everyone around us recoil in disgust. Standing off to the side, I clearly saw the fear on the guard's face. Yes, it was fear. He had recognized exactly who that woman was. Shameless. Absolutely shameless. Mrs. Sterling shouted again. "What are you standing there for? Drag her down." The lead guard let out a heavy sigh, clenched his teeth, pried the woman's arms from around Julian, and flung her unceremoniously to the floor. Meanwhile, Julian, his face flushed red, staggered off the bed and tried to crawl toward her, only for the woman to be kicked aside by another guard. She cried out in pain, but instead of cowering, she clutched at the guard's leg and began rubbing herself against him as if she were still making love. The revolting sight made those around us physically recoil. "Oh my God, what's wrong with Julian Blackwood?" people muttered. Mrs. Sterling was trembling with rage. "Drag him into the bathroom. Douse him with water until he sobers up." A few guards immediately hauled a dazed Julian into the adjoining bathroom. My mother, meanwhile, was livid. "That bastard is no better than a dog in heat. And that woman, she's completely debased herself." I hurried to tug at my mother's sleeve. "Mom, please don't scold anymore." "Why shouldn't I scold her?" she snapped. "You're too soft-hearted. A woman like that deserves a lesson." With that, my mother strode forward, grabbed the woman's tangled hair and raised her hand to slap her. I was just about to make a show of stopping her when she froze. Her eyes widened and she lifted the woman's head, glancing first at Mrs. Sterling, then back at me. A dawning horror was spreading across her face. Mrs. Sterling looked confused. "Mrs. Vance, why are you staring at me? Don't tell me that girl is family." My mother let out a cold, humorless laugh. "I don't make baseless claims. A rotten, filthy woman like this isn't worth dirtying my hands. Mrs. Sterling, you should handle her yourself." Though Mrs. Sterling didn't yet understand, she still signaled for the guards to haul the woman up. At that moment, the woman, Isabella, finally seemed to pierce through the drug-induced haze. Realizing she was surrounded by a crowd of the city's most powerful elites, she scrambled for the bedsheet, pulled it up to cover her face and screamed, "Get out! All of you get out!" Mrs. Sterling sneered, her voice dripping with contempt. "Weren't you just acting so flirty and shameless? What, now you feel embarrassed? Drag her out." The guards hesitated, their faces pale. Mrs. Sterling barked, "Do as I say, or do you not want your jobs anymore?" They had no choice. As they pulled a shrieking Isabella to her feet, the sheet fell away. "Auntie! Auntie!" she screamed, her voice raw with panic. "It's me, your niece." The sound of her voice made Mrs. Sterling's face drain of all color. Her hands trembled as she yanked the rest of the sheet away. When her eyes landed on that familiar tear-streaked face, she stumbled backwards several steps and collapsed to the ground in a dead faint. The crowd erupted into a frenzy of whispers. I put on my best shocked expression and cried out, "Isabella! How could it be you? Mrs. Sterling, isn't this your niece?" I let my voice tremble with just the right amount of betrayed innocence. "So, it turns out she's the one seducing Julian Blackwood. The Sterling family really does bully people too much." I covered my mouth, nearly bursting out laughing, but squeezed my mother's hand instead. She had realized the same thing and immediately said aloud, her voice ringing with cold fury, "Well done, Mrs. Sterling. Is this how your family raises your children? They can't behave properly unless they're rolling around in someone else's bed." Mrs. Sterling, who had been revived by her aides, looked as if she had been slapped. Her face was a mask of pure humiliation. The whispers grew louder, more vicious. I heard back in the day Mrs. Sterling herself climbed into old man Sterling's bed to get the position she has today. What a role model. Passing her ways down to her niece. And just then Julian, soaking wet and finally sober, was dragged out of the bathroom. He took in the entire scene, the crowd, his nakedness, a weeping Isabella and a furious Mrs. Sterling. His face burned with shame. I saw my moment. I rushed forward and slapped him twice, each blow ringing loud and hard through the stunned silence. "You bastard! You piece of trash! We're breaking off the engagement." Julian stared at me in shock, stammering, "Alara, Shut up, Julian," I cut him off coldly. "You ruined Mrs. Sterling's birthday banquet. You're shameless. From now on you walk your road and I'll walk mine." "It wasn't me, Alara," he shouted back, a desperate lie forming in his eyes. You're the one who harmed me." My mother, unable to endure another word, stormed up and slapped him across the face with a force that snapped his head back. "You bastard! You did this to yourself. No one harmed you." She turned her fiery gaze to Mrs. Sterling. "If the Sterling family doesn't give me an explanation today, I'll call the media immediately. Mrs. Sterling, you better check the surveillance cameras and find out who really drugged Julian. After all, that filthy dog was just now grinding himself against a male guard." The memory of that sight made Mrs. Sterling's face go pale again, her eyes filling with pure, unadulterated hatred as she glared at Julian. Isabella burst into tears and cried, "Auntie, it's my fault, but I really love him. Please, just let me be with him." "Shut up," Mrs. Sterling snapped, cutting her off without a trace of hesitation. "Since when do you have the right to decide your own marriage?" I knew well that Mrs. Sterling had married into the Sterling family herself, and Isabella was the pawn she had raised carefully all these years, spoiled like her own child, but all for one reason: so she could marry her off well to someone of at least equal or greater status. Julian Blackwood, with his family's fading fortune, he was nothing. Mrs. Sterling had never even looked at him. She took a deep, shuddering breath. "Check the surveillance footage." But Isabella leapt up, still clinging desperately. "No, don't check. I did it willingly. I want to marry him. Elara already broke off the engagement anyway." Hearing that, Julian grew agitated as well. "Yes, I made a mistake, but I'll take responsibility. I'll marry her." "You'll marry her?" Mrs. Sterling clutched her chest as if she might have a heart attack. Things had spiraled so far out of control that even she couldn't turn them around. At that moment, the master of the house arrived. Mr. Alistair Sterling, a man of few words and immense power, took in the tension in the room with a single sweeping glance. He quickly ordered the gawking crowd to disperse, leaving only our family, a humiliated Julian, and a sobbing Isabella behind. The cameras were reviewed and the truth was laid bare. It had been Isabella who instructed the servants to drug Julian's drink. I spoke in a low, steady voice, lacing it with just enough venom. "Miss Rossi, impressive. You really opened my eyes today." Mr. Sterling looked at me, his expression unreadable. "It was Isabella's fault. To make amends, you may name your condition." My heart thudded against my ribs. Unlike his wife, Mr. Sterling was deep and calculating. If I didn't seize this opportunity now, when would I? I met his gaze squarely. "The Vances want the exclusive contract with Ethelred Pharmaceuticals." I heard my parents suck in a sharp breath beside me. That contract was worth billions. Mr. Sterling thought for only a moment, then gave a curt nod. "Agreed. I'll arrange it. But Miss Vance, I expect you and your family to keep today's events quiet." "Rest assured, Mr. Sterling," I said calmly, though triumph was singing in my veins. "My family isn't the type to gossip." With his promise secured, my parents and I turned to leave. Before I walked out the door, I turned back for one last look at Julian. He was standing there, dripping and broken, surrounded by the ruins of his ambition. I offered him a silent, cold wish. "Good luck." But as we descended the stairs, I could still hear his pitiful screams echoing from the room behind us. The game was afoot, and I had just made the first devastating move. The drive home was shrouded in a heavy silence, broken only by the soft hum of the luxury car's engine. My father, Marcus Vance, gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. My mother, Eleanor, sat stiffly beside him, her face a marble mask of fury and humiliation. I sat in the back, watching the city lights blur past, the adrenaline of the night slowly receding, leaving a cold, hard certainty in its wake. I had done it. I had broken the first link in the chain that had bound me to my terrible fate. The engagement was over. The public humiliation had been redirected onto Julian and Isabella. And I had secured a business coup that would solidify my family's position for years to come. Yet the victory felt fragile. Julian was narrow-minded and vengeful. Isabella was a spoiled, desperate creature. And the Sterlings, particularly Agatha, had been deeply shamed. A cornered animal is the most dangerous kind. "Elara," my mother finally spoke, her voice tight. "How did you know?" I had prepared for this. I couldn't tell them I was a revenant from a bloody future. "I saw Isabella whispering to the server," I said, my voice low and weary. "I saw her slip something into Julian's glass. I thought I was being paranoid, but then, when he started acting strange and went straight for her, I knew. I couldn't face it. I couldn't be the one to save him only to be caught in their trap again." My mother reached back and squeezed my hand. "You were brave to walk away. And smarter than I gave you credit for." There was a new respect in her eyes. The soft-hearted daughter she thought she had was gone, replaced by a woman who had seen a snake and chosen not to handle it. My father grunted in agreement. "The Ethelred contract. That was audacious, Elara. Brilliant but audacious. Alistair Sterling doesn't make concessions lightly. He'll expect absolute discretion." And he'll have it, I said, looking out the window. But we can't control the wind. There were too many witnesses tonight. The story will get out. And it did. By the next morning, the society blogs and business tabloids were ablaze with carefully worded, yet scandalously clear reports. Blackwood heirs shocking gala fumble. Sterling niece at center of birthday banquet scandal. Vance engagement terminated amidst salacious revelations. The details were twisted and exaggerated, but the core truth remained. Julian Blackwood and Isabella Rossi had been caught in a drug-fueled lewd act, and I, the wronged fiancé, had publicly cast him aside. The Vance family received a wave of public sympathy, which my father expertly parlayed into a surge in stock value. The Sterling family, however, went into lockdown. Their PR machine worked overtime, spinning stories of a spiked punch bowl and young love making a mistake. But it was a feeble defense against the tidal wave of gossip. 3 days after the gala, I went to the family's private medical center for a routine checkup. It was an excuse, really. I needed the cold, clinical environment to ground myself, to reaffirm that my body was whole and healthy, untouched by the horrors I remembered. As I walked out of the examination room, folder of clean results in hand, I saw them. Julian was in a wheelchair, his left leg encased in a pristine white cast from knee to ankle. He looked haggard, his handsome face shadowed with stubble and pain. And beside him, clinging to his arm like a possessive vine, was Isabella. The moment her eyes landed on me, they lit up with a vicious, gloating triumph. She detached herself from Julian and strutted towards me, her heels clicking arrogantly on the polished floor. Well, if it isn't Alara Vance. Come to get a checkup for a broken heart, she sneered, her voice dripping with false sympathy. I said nothing, merely looking past her to Julian. His gaze was a complex mix of shame, anger, and something else. A dawning, terrible suspicion. No matter how hard you tried, you still lost, Isabella continued, mistaking my silence for defeat. He puffed out her chest. My aunt has agreed to let us marry. The wedding is set for 3 months from now. She actually had the gall to pull out her phone and send me an electronic invitation right there. My phone chimed in my purse. I glanced at the screen, at the garish digital save the date, and then back at her. A slow, cold smile spread across my lips. Of course, Isabella. I'll definitely come to your wedding. I let my voice drop to a conspiratorial whisper. I want to see what kind of spectacle you two will put on this time. Her face darkened, her lips pressing into a thin, bloodless line. Julian, from his wheelchair, quickly spoke up. Stop mocking us, Alara. This time we'll be happy. You'll regret this. I lowered my gaze to him, my smile never wavering. You'd better practice harder, Julian. With your skills, you can't even get hard without drugs. You've got a long life ahead of you. It was a low blow designed to maim his fragile ego. His face contorted in fury. You bitch. But I was already turning away, walking down the hall with a steady, unhurried pace. His roar of impotent rage echoed behind me, a satisfying soundtrack to my exit. In my previous life I had been his wife, so I knew better than anyone. Julian Blackwood's pride was his most vulnerable organ. I had just plunged a dagger straight into it. I knew he would realize I had changed too drastically. The Alara he knew would have been weeping, begging for an explanation, not delivering cold, calculated insults. The seed of suspicion was planted. Sure enough, that evening a text message arrived from an unknown number, though I knew exactly who it was. You've been reborn too, haven't you, Alara? I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. So he remembered. Or at least he suspected. He had pieced together my uncharacteristic actions and arrived at the only logical yet impossible conclusion. Another message followed. I know I owed you in the last life, but anyone who wants to climb higher would have done the same. So I should thank you. If you hadn't stepped aside, how could I have gotten aboard this bigger ship? Reading his words, a cold, mirthless laugh escaped me. He was thanking me. He saw Isabella, even in her disgrace, as a bigger ship than my family. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of it, the complete lack of remorse, solidified the icy resolve in my heart. He was a monster, plain and simple. I typed out a single response. Enjoy the voyage. I hear it's headed for an iceberg. Then I blocked the number without a second thought. The direct communication was over. The war, however, was just beginning. I didn't have to wait long for the next salvo. A week later, the first article appeared online. It was a seemingly consumer-focused piece, questioning the safety of Elysian Glow, one of our family's most popular skincare lines. The Vance family had been in pharmaceuticals for generations, and our foray into cosmetics used ancient family-held formulas. They were safe, effective, and had a sterling reputation. But this article was different. It featured user testimonials from people claiming to have suffered from rapid heartbeat, severe nausea, and disfiguring skin allergies after using our products. They even posted grainy, unverifiable hospital records as proof. At first, our PR team treated it as a nuisance, a standard bit of corporate trolling. We released statements, provided our own extensive safety data, and tried to contact the alleged victims. But they all fell silent. They didn't want compensation or resolution. They only wanted to scream their accusations into the void. Then the target shifted onto me. Someone with meticulous detail dug up every receipt from my time studying abroad, every luxury handbag I'd ever purchased, every piece of jewelry I owned, complete with their appraised values. They were all plastered across social media, accompanied by a vicious, orchestrated narrative. Look at them using the sweat and blood of ordinary people to buy their daughter luxury goods. Look at all that jewelry. It's patched together from the ruined lives of people like us. Isn't that right, Ilara Vance? Don't you feel the least bit guilty? You deserve to be dumped. Damn capitalists. Shameless parasites. The mob, whipped into a frenzy, descended. Our customer service lines were swamped. Our products were being boycotted. Elysian Glow was trending, but for all the wrong reasons. My parents were overwhelmed, their faces etched with a stress I hadn't seen since the days leading up to my death in the other timeline. I knew with a cold certainty who was behind it. Julian was too straightforward for this. This had Isabella's spiteful fingerprints all over it, likely with the tacit approval or even assistance of her aunt, Agatha. They were trying to destroy us, to make me pay for their public shaming. But they had forgotten one thing. I was no longer the woman who would crumble under pressure. I had been broken in ways they couldn't imagine, and I had put myself back together with a core of tempered steel. I went to my father's study, where he was staring despondently at a screen full of plummeting stock charts. "Dad," I said, my voice calm and firm, "we're not playing defense anymore." He looked up, his eyes tired. "What do you propose, Ilara?" "We've issued statements. The official agencies have confirmed our products are safe. No one is listening." "Then we stop talking to the mob and start talking to the law," I replied. "I'm filing a case for malicious defamation and business sabotage. We have all the evidence of our product safety. Now we need to prove their lies." I hired the most ruthless, high-profile legal team in the city, paying them double their usual rate with one directive: track down every single one of the anonymous victims. With the pressure from our lawyers and the threat of crippling lawsuits, the faceless accusers began to panic. One by one, their social media accounts vanished. But we had already archived everything. Our legal team, working with a digital forensics firm I hired privately, traced the orchestration of the campaign back to a series of shell companies. And those shell companies, after enough digging, led right back to a trust fund controlled by Isabella Rossi. I didn't feel triumph. I felt a cold, grim satisfaction. In both this life and the last, Isabella and I had little direct enmity. In my past life, I'd barely crossed paths with her before she was shipped overseas. Yet she had been a willing participant in my destruction. In this life, I had already stepped aside and let her have the man she so desperately wanted. And still she turned around to bite me. Fine. Then she couldn't blame me for being merciless. I handed over all the evidence to the police. Soon after, the official announcement was made. Isabella Rossi was taken into custody for questioning regarding a conspiracy to commit business defamation and for filing false police reports. The news was a bombshell. The Sterling family's attempts to quietly bury their scandal had just been blown wide open. A few days after Isabella's arrest, I was at our corporate headquarters, meeting with the legal team, when Julian found me. He had managed to get himself up the elevator and into the reception area, his wheelchair a stark symbol of his desperation. He looked worse than he had at the hospital, his eyes sunken, his suit hanging loosely on his frame. "Ilara," he said, his voice raspy. "We need to talk." I gestured for my lawyers to give us a moment. We stood in the sleek, modern reception area, the city sprawling beneath us. Make it quick, Julian. I have a company to save from your fiancé's tantrum. His jaw tightened. I know you hate me, but you didn't have to drag her into this. Going against the Sterling family will never end well for you. Can we just end it here? I'm sorry. All right. I couldn't help but laugh, a sharp, bitter sound. And do you even know the damage that scandal caused my family? I raised my hand, pinching my thumb and forefinger almost together. We were this close to a catastrophic loss. Either you pay the damages for her or she sits in prison. One way or another, I'm not letting this slide. Julian, furious, tried to stand but his broken leg buckled. Stuck in the wheelchair, he had to glare up at me, a position of utter subjugation I savored. Things are different now, Julian, I said softly, leaning down slightly. This is my turf. When you talk to me, you'd better show some respect. I stepped closer, reached down and patted his cheek condescendingly, pushing his head aside. Then I remembered something. Oh, right. He blinked in confusion. What? I smiled coldly and slapped him hard across the face. The crack echoed in the quiet room. I almost forgot to hit you. You piece of trash. His face darkened, fury blazing in his eyes. Don't go too far, Alara. I admit I betrayed you. That was wrong. But I had no choice. He drugged me. And the first person I saw was you. Why did you walk away? Because I gave you that chance, I sneered. With the Sterling family's resources, Julian, you'll get to live comfortably in this life. Consider it a gift. I lowered my head again, my voice a venomous whisper. What's wrong, Julian? Why isn't the Sterling family helping you? Why is that? He immediately slumped, the fight draining out of him, replaced by a pathetic whimper. It's my fault. You can hate me. Beat me if you want, but please let Isabella go. Enough, Julian. You have only two choices. Either she kneels down and apologizes or you pay compensation. If neither of those, then don't say another word. Get out. I swung the glass door to the reception area wide open, motioning for him to leave. His face turned ashen, but in the end he had no choice. He maneuvered his wheelchair around and rolled himself out, a broken man in every sense of the word. I watched him go, knowing this wasn't the end. He would crawl back to the Sterlings and Agatha Sterling would be forced to deal with me directly. The serpent was cornered and I was ready for its strike. Julian's pathetic departure from my office was not an end, but an intermission. I knew the next act would feature a far more formidable player. Agatha Sterling would not let her prized pawn, her own niece, her blood, rot in a jail cell over something as trivial as my family's reputation. The stakes for her were infinitely higher. The summons came not as a phone call, but as a thick cream-colored envelope delivered by a stern-faced courier. It requested my presence for afternoon tea at the Sterling Manor. The formality of it was a power play, an attempt to re-establish the hierarchy I had so publicly dismantled. I accepted, of course. I would meet the spider in her own web. The Sterling Manor was a monument to old money and cold ambition. It was all marble floors, soaring ceilings, and portraits of grim-faced ancestors judging all who passed. I was led not to a sunny parlor, but to Agatha's private study, a room that felt more like a war room than a place for relaxation. The walls were lined with books she had probably never read, and a single massive mahogany desk dominated the space. She sat behind it, a queen on a thorny throne. She did not rise. She merely gestured for me to sit in the austere chair opposite her. Her eyes, the color of flint, scanned me, searching for the weak, lovesick girl she remembered. She found only a reflection of her own cold calculation. Miss Vance, she began, her voice like the whisper of a blade being drawn. She slid a single black bank card across the polished surface of the desk. Sign the waiver dropping all charges. There is $3 million in this account. Consider it compensation for your temporary distress. $3 million. Before I died in my last life, Isabella was living in luxury in Milan, funded by the Sterling fortune. Across 2 lives combined, was that all my suffering was worth? $3 million? A laugh, low and utterly devoid of humor, escaped me. I didn't touch the card. I let it lie there, an insult on the fine wood. Agatha's face tightened, fine lines appearing around her mouth. Alara, don't go too far. Too far. I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Agatha Sterling, I truly admire you. To risk turning the entire Sterling family against you for one niece. The Sterlings don't lack for heirs. Your own son Robert is abroad about to come back and take over the business, isn't he? You wanted to prop Isabella up to curry favor with other powerful families, a valuable, beautiful pawn. But she let Julian Blackwood, a man from a fading house, steal that opportunity. And now you come to me with this cheap trick. I shook my head, a mockery of pity on my face. Ridiculous. Her face paled, a clear, unmasked worry flashing in her eyes. I had struck a nerve. Her position was not as secure as she projected. She was a queen, yes, but one whose knights were loyal to the king, not to her. I rose to my feet, the movement graceful and final. Isabella isn't worth you making such a fuss. Unless, I let the word hang in the air, thick and heavy with implication. Unless what? She demanded, her composure cracking. Unless she isn't just your niece. I didn't finish the sentence. I didn't need to. I let that ambiguous, poisonous seed take root in the fertile soil of her fear. I turned and walked out, leaving her sitting there, her face as white as the marble statues in her hall. As I reached the door, I glanced back and saw her collapse forward onto her desk, her head in her hands, utterly defeated in a way a mere financial loss could never accomplish. The truth had always felt strange to me. Why was Agatha Sterling, a woman with a son and a daughter of her own, so frantic, so desperate when it came to Isabella? It wasn't normal aunt-like affection. It was something deeper, something primal. I knew what I had to do. The moment I was in my car, I called a number I had procured for exactly this purpose. A private investigator known for his discretion and his ability to unearth skeletons the rich and powerful thought were buried forever. I need you to dig into something, I said, my voice calm. The bloodline of the Sterling family. Specifically the parentage of Isabella Rossi. Start about 26 years ago. The pieces fell into place with an almost eerie swiftness. My investigator was worth every exorbitant penny I paid him. The report landed in my encrypted inbox within 48 hours. More than 25 years ago, a young Agatha Sterling, then Agatha Moore, had fallen in love with a penniless artist during her college years. Her powerful family disapproved, so she ran away with him. She disappeared for a year. When she returned, she was alone, and shortly after she married the aging, powerful Alistair Sterling. That same year, her brother's wife, who had not been pregnant, suddenly had a new baby girl, Isabella. The investigator had even managed to procure Agatha's prenatal records from a small rural clinic from that missing year. The dates were a perfect match. No wonder. No wonder she was so desperate to protect Isabella. Everything was always covered up for her. Every road cleared for her. Isabella wasn't just a niece. She was Agatha's secret, illegitimate daughter, her greatest shame and her most closely guarded treasure. A flicker of something that felt almost like pity stirred in me, but it was quickly extinguished. This was not a reason for her to try to destroy me. It was a weapon. Meanwhile, the legal wheels turned. Agatha, leveraging all her remaining influence, managed to secure Isabella's release. She found a fall guy, one of the original victims, who came forward, claiming she had acted alone in a misguided attempt to extort money from our company. She took all the charges herself. I didn't interfere. This temporary victory would only make the final fall more devastating. The very day she was freed, Isabella came strutting back into my life, a phoenix risen from ashes she didn't realize were still smoldering. She intercepted me as I was leaving a charity luncheon, her arrogance fully restored, buoyed by what she perceived as her aunt's invincible power. "Elara, you lost," she declared, her voice a triumphant sneer. "The Sterling family supports me. Julian is mine. You'll never be able to surpass me in this lifetime." She was so arrogantly foolish, so blind it was almost laughable. She had none of her mother's cunning, only her sense of entitlement. As she spoke, a notification popped up on my phone. It was the investigator's final report, complete with scanned documents. I smiled at her. "We'll see, Isabella. We'll see." Public opinion, I had learned, was a double-edged sword. Isabella and Julian had tried to wield it as a blunt instrument against me. It was time to show them how a surgeon wields a scalpel. The opportunity came at a small, intimate afternoon tea my mother hosted for her closest and most gossipy friends. I happened to stop by, carrying gifts of exclusive, newly launched Elysian Glow products for each of the ladies. Their faces lit up with delight. It's been so long and Alara has only gotten prettier, one cooed. Those past troubles, thank goodness for you, dear, said another. I heard from your mother it was your insistence on reporting to the police that finally resolved things. Very capable indeed. My mother beamed with pride. That girl is stubborn. She was so furious she insisted on finding the truth. Who would have thought she'd really uncover something? She leaned in, her voice dropping dramatically. Something huge. Mom, don't say another word, I cut in quickly, layering my voice with feigned anxiety. What if it spreads outside? That was all the kindling needed. The ladies leaned in, their eyes gleaming with avaricious curiosity. Oh, don't worry. We're all family here. We'd never tell anyone else. Come on. What's the secret? Tell us. I hesitated, glancing at my mother as if seeking permission, then finally lowered my voice to a hushed whisper. I heard that Isabella Rossi is actually Agatha Sterling's biological daughter. The gasps that followed were like a symphony. I could almost see the connections firing in their minds. The unusual favoritism, the desperate protection, the timing. I simply smiled, never confirming anything, only repeating, I heard it. I left the evidence for their imaginations to construct. In this viper's nest of high society, dragging someone else down was a sport, and I had just handed them the most tantalizing prey imaginable. It didn't take long for the rumor to reach the one person who mattered most, Alistair Sterling. How he dealt with his wife I didn't know and didn't care. But the fallout was immediate and palpable. The Sterling family closed ranks tighter than ever, but the damage was done. Agatha's power base, built on perception and fear, began to crumble. With Julian Blackwood temporarily neutralized and the Sterling women reeling, I turned my attention to a new, more promising front. Alistair Sterling had an illegitimate son, a man known only as Six. He had just returned from abroad, and the whispers described him as mischievous, rebellious, and utterly uninterested in the family's corporate politics. He was a wild card and I needed a new piece on the board. A few discreet inquiries, a few coincidental meetings at art galleries and high-speed car rallies, places I knew he frequented, and I successfully landed a date. Six Sterling was everything the rest of his family wasn't. Vibrant, direct, and with a sharp intelligence he hid behind a cavalier smile. He was especially drawn to strong women and I made sure he saw only strength. When I finally walked into a Sterling family gathering with my arm linked through his, the air in the room froze. Agatha Sterling, already brittle from the rumors, looked at me as if I were a ghost returned to haunt her. Her nails dug so hard into her palms I was surprised she didn't draw blood. Alistair Sterling looked surprised to see me, but he quickly regained his composure, his gaze calculating. When Six introduced me, Alistair gave a thin, cold smile. Miss Vance, you truly are remarkable. Not only did you throw our family into chaos, but now even my son is smitten with you. You flatter me, Mr. Sterling, I said, my voice sweet as poison. Who knows, someday we may even be family. Agatha's face turned to stone. Alara Vance, you're really something. But Six immediately stepped forward, placing a protective arm around my waist. And don't look at her that way. Alara is a very genuine girl. Genuine. Agatha laughed, a cold, brittle sound. She's the one who ruined Isabella, who made her end up like this. Silence. Alistair snapped, his voice like a whip crack. He glared at her, then turned to me, his tone forcibly softening. I hear your family's contract with Ethelred Pharmaceuticals is moving along well, and you're developing a new product too. Yes, I answered smoothly. The new drug is still under review, but there are some difficulties. I came here today to discuss this privately with you. My family is willing to give Six a 10% stake of the profits from the project. I wonder if you could help us get through the approval process. Agatha snorted. How calculating. The Sterling family isn't yours. Who are you to use our resources like that? Enough. Go rest, Mr. Sterling ordered her, his patience gone. He gestured and 2 attendants moved to escort her from the room. Only then did she seem to realize how far she had fallen, screaming in despair as she was led away. Alistair. For an outsider you treat me like this. Do you even know? She didn't get to finish. Someone covered her mouth. I just smiled, unconcerned. Six squeezed my hand gently, patting it a few times as if to comfort me. After dinner, Mr. Sterling called us into his study. An hour of intense negotiation later, Six and I walked out hand in hand. The deal was struck. He had agreed to leverage his influence for our new drug. In return, he gained a profitable venture for his son and, I suspected, a way to further sideline his troublesome wife. "Didn't think you were this impressive," Six whispered, a genuine grin on his face. "Looks like I'll have to rely on you to support me from now on." He pulled me into his arms and I laughed, my mood light and carefree for the first time since my rebirth. As we left the study, we passed a seething Agatha in the hallway. She had witnessed our affection, and the venom in her eyes was palpable. "Let's see how long you can stay smug," she spat. I raised my brows, meeting her gaze squarely. "Well, it's still better than your cheap daughter." Her face darkened instantly. "What nonsense are you talking about?" "You know exactly what I mean, Auntie," I said, layering the title with contempt. I took Six's hand and walked away, leaving her standing frozen, glaring at my back with a hatred so pure it was almost tangible. She was powerless and she knew it. The spider was caught in her own web and I was already spinning a new one. The alliance with Six Sterling was not a matter of the heart, but of the balance sheet. We were two predators who had recognized a mutually beneficial hunting ground. His father, Alistair, saw our partnership as a way to groom his rebellious son for a role in the Empire while simultaneously acquiring a lucrative new asset and keeping me, a potential adversary, close. He was a grandmaster playing a long game, but he underestimated the depth of the grudge I held, a grudge that encompassed his entire family. My life settled into a new, calculated rhythm. Days were spent at Vance headquarters, steering the Ethelred contract and the new drug approval process with a focus that impressed my father and silenced any remaining boardroom doubters. Evenings were often spent with Six, at dinners, galas, or secluded restaurants. Our relationship was a carefully crafted performance for the public, a display of unity and power that projected an image of an unshakable new bloc. In private, we were partners in a conspiracy, our conversations a mix of strategy and dark humor. "My father thinks he's using you to control me," Six said to me one night, swirling the brandy in his glass. We were on the terrace of his penthouse, the city lights spread out below us like a field of captive stars. "And my parents think I'm using you to secure our family's future," I replied, taking a sip of my wine. "They're not entirely wrong." He grinned, that reckless, charming grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "And what are we really doing, Alara?" I met his gaze, the ghost of my past life flickering in the depths of my own. "We're burning down the house, Six. And we're going to walk away with the deed to the land." He clinked his glass against mine. "I like the way you think." Meanwhile, the world I had left behind was crumbling exactly as I had foreseen. The Sterling family, true to my prediction, cut off all financial and social support for Julian Blackwood. He had been a useful pawn for Agatha's plans for Isabella. But with Agatha in disgrace and Isabella's value plummeting, he was just a liability. I heard through the gossip mill that he had approached Isabella several times, begging her to intercede with her aunt, but nothing came of it. The once proud white moonlight girlfriend had lost her luster, and Julian was finally realizing the foundation of his bigger ship was rotten timber. It was during a site visit to one of our new manufacturing plants that he found me again. 2 months had passed since the gala, but he looked a decade older. The tailored suit he wore seemed to hang on his frame, borrowed from a more prosperous version of himself. The arrogant glow in his eyes was gone, replaced by a desperate, hollowed-out exhaustion. He must have been waiting for hours, and my security team, following my prior instructions, let him approach. He staggered toward me as I walked from the corporate limousine to the plant's entrance. "Alara," he said, his voice raspy. "I know I was wrong. I didn't break stride. That's the first true thing you've said to me in 2 lifetimes." He kept pace, a pathetic, limping shadow. Can we get back together?" I stopped and turned to face him, the winter wind whipping my coat around my legs. I didn't need to feign the revulsion that twisted my features. "Don't say such nauseating things. I have a boyfriend now, and we were never that close to begin with." I let the dismissal hang in the air, then delivered the calculated blow. "For Isabella's sake, you'd better go back to her. Don't let her lose her mind again and try to frame me." The mention of her name and my accusation was a spark on the tinder of his desperation. His eyes, sunken and bloodshot, flashed with a sudden, familiar anger. "Isabella turned out like this. Wasn't it your fault?" he hissed, taking a step closer. The scent of cheap whiskey clung to him. Why did I dream? I dreamed I was drugged, that I was with you, that you were pregnant. But I hurt you. I locked you away. The air left my lungs. He wasn't just suspicious. He was having flashes, echoes of the nightmare we had both lived through. The mask of cold control I wore threatened to slip. This wasn't part of my plan. That wasn't a dream, I said, my voice low and deadly, all pretense gone. That was reality. I lived through it. Julian, in this life I'll drag you down into the mud. You want to cling to Isabella, become the Sterling family's son-in-law? I'll make her into a discarded pawn. You want to team up with her against me? I'll see her thrown in prison. I took a step toward him, forcing him to look down at me, my gaze holding all the frozen hatred of a lifetime spent in a basement. Julian Blackwood, you and she belong in hell. The moment the words left my lips, his face went ghostly pale, all the blood draining away as if I'd opened a vein. The confirmation of his worst, most fragmented fears was a physical blow. Why? He whispered, the word a broken thing. Why is it like this? His question was so laughably, tragically naive it almost broke my heart. If I still had one left for him. After everything he had done, he still dared to ask why. The last vestige of my patience snapped. The cat-and-mouse game had lost its appeal. This is the debt you owe me, I said, my voice flat and final. From now on I'll stick to you. I'll never let you rise again. He froze, staggering back 2 steps as if I'd shoved him. Then, with a guttural roar that was pure, undiluted rage, he lunged. His hands, strong from a lifetime of privilege and sports, closed around my throat. The world telescoped to his contorted face, his savage, murderous eyes. If I could die again, live again, I'd climb straight to the top, he screamed, spittle flying from his lips. One step into heaven. He was going to kill me. Right here, in front of my own factory, he was going to strangle the life out of me and fulfill the destiny he'd carved for me in that basement. I clawed at his hands, my vision spotting, the cold air burning in my constricted throat. But he never got the chance. A black blur shot past me. A vicious, perfectly aimed kick caught Julian in the ribs with a sickening crack. His grip vanished as he was flung sideways, crashing into the concrete pavement with a cry of pain. I stumbled back, gasping, clutching my neck as Six Lewis materialized, catching me in his arms. His face, usually alight with mischievous charm, was a mask of ice. Break his leg, Six said, his voice devoid of all emotion. How pitiful. The leg Julian had only just recovered. This time the sound of the security team's baton connecting was a wet, final crunch. His agonized scream tore through the crisp industrial air, a sound of pure animalistic agony. But no one cared. The workers averted their eyes. My security team looked on, impassive. He deserved it. I drew in a long, shuddering breath, finally calming down as I leaned into the solid, protective strength of the man holding me. Six's voice was still cold as a glacier when he spoke, his eyes fixed on Julian's writhing form. He tried to assault me, I choked out, letting a tremor enter my voice. I was terrified. He immediately tightened his hold, his gaze sweeping over my face, my bruised neck. He didn't need the performance, he had seen the truth. He ordered his men to beat Julian Blackwood mercilessly, a command they carried out with brutal efficiency, before tossing his broken body into the back of a car to be dumped somewhere far from me. I leaned into Six's embrace as we watched them go, the corner of my lips curling in a faint, cold smile. This time they had crumbled even faster than I had imagined. The following weeks were a masterclass in ruthless corporate and social warfare. With the attempted assault on me as public justification, Six moved with breathtaking speed. Officially taking a greater role in Sterling Corporation, he struck with the precision of a surgeon excising a tumor. He kicked out all of Agatha's cronies from the company's board and upper management, purging her influence completely. Riding that momentum, he proposed a joint venture between our families, a proposal that, on the surface, was a brilliant business move. In reality, it was a Trojan horse. Using Sterling resources and Vance expertise, we systematically targeted the Blackwood family's remaining assets. Their business, already weakened by Julian's scandals and lack of leadership, was devoured piece by piece. Their contracts were voided, their partners poached, their loans called in. In what felt like no time at all, the Blackwoods declared bankruptcy. Every bit of their market share, Every last vestige of their former glory fell into our hands. Julian was driven out of his family home, buried under a mountain of debt he could never hope to repay. The news reports showed a grainy photo of him clutching a cardboard box of his belongings, standing under a freeway overpass. And he wasn't alone. Isabella was with him. The final pathetic act of their tragedy played out in the urban underworld. I had a private investigator send me photos. They were living in a makeshift shelter of cardboard and tarps, their fine clothes replaced with grimy cast-offs. The love that had supposedly been worth betraying and destroying me for had curdled into bitter recrimination. One grainy long-lens photo captured a screaming match. Julian, his face a mask of fury, was shaking Isabella. The report from my investigator quoted his words. "Why won't you go beg your mother? Aren't you the real daughter of Mrs. Sterling? Why won't you ask her to help me? Otherwise, what use are you?" Isabella, her hair matted, her face contorted, shrieked back. "So you were only with me for my family's resources? What if I had nothing to do with the Sterlings? Would you still care about me?" His reply was the final ugly truth he had always held in his heart. "If you weren't tied to the Sterling family, who would give a damn about you, Isabella? You're shameless enough to drug me and climb into my bed. Now that you're worthless, who needs you anymore? Either you beg Mrs. Sterling to help me rise again, or we're done." The photo that followed showed Isabella, enraged, lunging at him. The two of them, a tangle of misery and rage, struggled and tumbled down the shallow embankment of the overpass. The investigator's report was clinical. Both sustained severe injuries resulting in partial paralysis. The Rossi family refused to take her back, and the ruined Blackwoods had no strength left to care for them. The two of them were left to survive beneath the bridge, two broken souls dragging their shattered bodies to beg for scraps. In a final twisted act of maternal instinct, Agatha Sterling softened. Stripped of her standing but still holding the title and a private allowance, she began sending money, just enough to keep them alive. She intended only to help Isabella, even making furtive, secret plans to somehow bring her daughter home. But Julian, like the parasite he was, clung to Isabella, refusing to let go. He knew she was his last tenuous connection to the wealth and power he craved. He insisted she must stay with him forever. If he was going to die, he'd drag her down with him. The stage was set for the final bloody scene. My web was complete. All that was left was to watch the flies struggle until they tore themselves apart. The cold snap that gripped the city seemed to seep into the very bones of the forgotten and the fallen. My investigators' reports became a grim nightly ritual. Photos of Julian and Isabella huddled under a threadbare blanket, steam from a sewer grate their only warmth. Audio recordings of their fights, their voices raw with despair and a hatred that had once been reserved for me. Agatha Sterling's clandestine aid was a sporadic lifeline. She would send a courier with an envelope of cash, never enough to lift them out of the gutter, but just enough to prolong their suffering. It was a mother's desperate, furtive love, warped by circumstance and her own impotent rage. But Julian, like a bloodhound, always sniffed out the money. He'd snatch it, spending most on cheap liquor and whatever drugs he could afford, leaving Isabella with scraps for food. I watched it all from a distance, a curator of their misery. Six would sometimes look at me, a question in his eyes, but he never voiced it. He understood that this was not just business. It was a reckoning written in blood. The final confrontation happened on a night when the temperature plummeted below freezing. Agatha, driven by a report that Isabella was ill with fever, decided to risk a personal visit. Dressed in an uncharacteristically plain coat, she descended into their underworld, a queen venturing into the sewers. My investigator was there, a shadow in the darkness, his camera capturing every moment. She found them in a furious argument under the overpass, their breath pluming in the frigid air. "You worthless cripple!" Isabella was shrieking, her voice hoarse. "You can't even steal a proper blanket. And you're a used-up whore your own mother doesn't want." Julian roared back, his face mottled with rage and cold. Agatha's arrival froze them both. "Isabella," she said, her voice trembling, a bag of supplies in her hand. "Mother." Isabella's voice was a broken whisper. The word she had never been allowed to utter in public now laid bare in this filthy, exposed space. Julian's eyes lit up with a feral gleam. He saw not a person but an opportunity. As Agatha moved toward Isabella, he lunged, his movements clumsy from his injuries and the cold, but fueled by a desperate strength. He pulled a rusted, wicked-looking knife from his coat, where he'd gotten it I couldn't guess, and pressed it against Isabella's throat. "If you won't take me too, I'll kill her," he screamed at Agatha. The audio from my investigator's recording was crystal clear. Isabella's scream was blood-curdling, her eyes wide with a final, absolute betrayal. The man she had wanted with all her heart, the man for whom she had destroyed herself and tried to destroy me, was now ready to slit her throat in a desperate bid for salvation. Agatha stood frozen, a statue of horror. She had navigated the cutthroat world of high society for decades, but she was unprepared for this raw, animalistic desperation. "Fine," she finally gritted out, her voice cracking. "Then I don't need either of you." She opened her purse, pulled out a thick wad of bills and tossed it onto the frozen ground at their feet. It was a fraction of what she had brought. "Here's 100,000. It'll keep you alive for a while." It was the final, unforgivable sin. Isabella, seeing her mother ready to buy her way out of responsibility, snapped. Her fury twisted into outright madness. "Mother! I'm your real daughter," she screamed, the words tearing from her throat. "How can you treat me like this? Your other daughter abroad enjoys riches and luxury, but you throw me a mere 100,000 to get rid of me?" Her screams were those of a soul shattering. In the chaos as she thrashed against Julian, the knife in his hand slipped. It wasn't a stab of intent, but a tragic, clumsy slip. The blade sank deep into Agatha Sterling's chest. The recording captured the awful, wet sound, followed by a profound silence and then Julian's gasp of shock. Agatha staggered back, her eyes wide with surprise, then nothingness. She collapsed to the frozen ground, the life leaving her body instantly. The police arrived soon after. Julian was arrested on the spot, covered in Agatha's blood. Isabella, her mind completely broken, was cackling and sobbing, clutching the bloody money to her chest. She was eventually committed to a high-security psychiatric facility, a raving lunatic forever lost in the nightmare of her own making. Of course, I had my hand in making sure things turned out that way. The anonymous tip to Agatha about Isabella's illness? My doing. The constant pressure from my legal team, ensuring Julian's debts were called in with relentless severity, pushing him to the brink? My strategy. I hadn't held the knife, but I had sharpened it, handed it to him, and backed him into a corner where using it was the only option his twisted mind could conceive. On the day Julian was formally sentenced to life in prison, I went to see him. He was brought into the visitor's room in a prison jumpsuit, his body broken, his spirit extinguished. He wept miserably, great, heaving sobs that racked his frame. "I was wrong, Alara. I was wrong. Forgive me, please," he begged over and over. I looked at him through the scarred plexiglass, my heart a frozen stone in my chest. "In my previous life," I said, my voice calm and clear, "you locked me in a basement and let me die in a pool of blood during childbirth. Back then, I swore that if I ever had another life, I would make you pay with blood." I leaned closer to the divider. "And now I finally have. This time, just stay put and enjoy the rest of your life in there." I stood and walked away. Behind me, Julian Carter's wails of agony and regret echoed down the sterile corridor, but I never looked back. That chapter of my life was closed, its spine broken, its pages burned. The Sterling family held a small, private funeral for Agatha Sterling. The public story was a sudden, tragic illness. No one outside the innermost circle knew the sordid truth. Seizing the chance, Six and I moved like lightning. In the wake of the tragedy and with Alistair Sterling reeling, we absorbed most of the Sterling family's vulnerable assets into our joint venture. It was a bloodless corporate coup financed by the literal blood spilled under an overpass. Mr. Sterling, unable to withstand the shock of his wife's death and the rapid erosion of his empire, suffered a massive stroke soon after. He was rushed to the same private hospital where my new life had begun. I went to see him. It was a calculated final act of cruelty, but one I felt he deserved. He was propped up in the hospital bed, his body slack, one side of his face drooping. But his eyes, one clear and one clouded, held a bitter, lucid hatred as I entered the room. He knew. He had finally seen through every one of my schemes, understood the scale of the vengeance I had wrought upon his house. Six was with me. We stood by the bed, a united front. "He knows," Six said quietly, his hand on my back. I leaned close to the old man, so close I could smell the antiseptic and decay on him. I whispered a few choice words into his ear, my voice too low for the nurses to hear. I reminded him of the son he had placed his hopes on, the boy who had returned from abroad. I told him the truth, that his real son Robert had died in a car accident years ago, a fact Agatha had hidden from him. The man he called Six, the man who now held his empire, was nothing more than a substitute, a brilliantly chosen and surgically altered actor I had found and groomed for this very purpose. This too had been part of the trap I had laid from the very beginning. This time, Julian wasn't the only one I wanted revenge on. The Sterling family was the ultimate target. In my past life, they had been Julian's silent backers, their resources the fuel for his ascent over the ruins of my family and my corpse. Alistair Sterling's face turned a deep, dangerous crimson. He struggled to rise, a guttural sound escaping his paralyzed throat, his one good hand clawing at the air. But his body could no longer obey his commands. In the end, the fury was too much for his ravaged body to contain. He choked, his eyes bulging, and then he stilled, drawing his last ragged breath. The hatred in his eyes was the last thing to fade. We stood in silence for a moment, the hum of the medical equipment the only sound. "It's done," Six said, his voice flat. I nodded. The harvest was complete. The fields of my enemies were salted ashes. I had an ally fighting beside me, and I had parents who were safe, healthy, and prouder of me than they had ever been. That for now was enough. The end.